The Calling is a three-channel video installation, so it's 3 simultaneous projections with sound. It's a work that considers 3 communities that practice a form of whistled language. That's, I guess, the main, what gives the work its structure, but it also considers what are the factors that contribute to that language. How is it used in the environment? How does the environment affect the evolution and demise of the language? What are the ways of life of the people who are using these languages? And considering this whistling language as as a culture that's living, adapting, and perhaps in a demise.
And in a full sentence, can you tell me where you shot the work?
The work was shot in 3 locations in northern Turkey in the Black Sea region in a very small village called Kuşköy. The second location is in Greece on the island of Evia, in the village is called Antioch. And the third location is in the Canary Islands on the island of Gomera, which is part of Spain and it's west of Morocco. There's kind of a loose structure to the work. You can enter the work and experience it at any point, and it cycles around, and the kind of overall structure of the work is, the idea of cycles is actually quite an element within the work, so I guess you can come in and experience it at any stage. But yeah, within each community, there's 3 parts to the work. Each community is a sort of chapter of the work. It begins with a prologue, which is shot in Istanbul. And then we visit Kuşköy, where the language is probably at its most functional and still being used in a very traditional way. And then we move to Greece, where we watch the language experience a kind of decline and the effects of environmental change, ageing population, these kind of things that are affecting how the language will survive or not. And the final location, the final chapter, focuses on La Gomera, where they're implementing the language is part of the education system. So children are learning it at school, and it's also part of the tourism on the island. So yeah, there is kind of an arc that looks at. I think of 3 chapters in terms of like maybe a living, death, and a kind of rebirth. That's sort of how I've imagined the structure. It's interesting. I've thought a lot about the documentary form in the making of this work, and of course that's not my background at all. And I was quite wary that dealing with a subject matter that has in the past been subject to a sort of sociological gaze or an anthropological kind of perspective on the way languages work. I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to create an installation where a viewer could experience a more abstracted kind of impression of these places and people and this tradition, and also using the elements within video moving image installations that are its strongest parts of its form is space, the spatial features of sound within a gallery space, the ability to work across multiple screens and not be confined to a single screen kind of presentation of ideas. These are all things that I'm kind of interested in as an artist working with the moving image, the way that you can present images in outside of the conventions of cinema or documentary. That's kind of why this form interests me. When I was thinking about the development of the format of the work, the idea of the panorama was something that I wanted to present from very early on. Felt to me like this was a way of communicating a sense of distance and space. So it's the panoramas that appear within the work, where we have one scene that appears across the 3 screens. These for me act as kind of punctuation points for the work. I wanted them to be able to communicate where we are, that perhaps we've changed location. They're also sort of moments to take a breath and maybe just step back and sort of reconsider where we are for a moment, as kind of like a momentary change between ideas within scenes. So yeah, they're in terms of the grammar of the work, they have quite an important function, but they're also aesthetically there to kind of create just this breadth, this idea of breadth, which is so integral to how the people live in these communities and the landscape they live within. And I felt like within the confines of a black box that was of a gallery space, that's perhaps one way that I could have communicated that idea.
Do you have a favourite scene?
I have favourite scenes because they remind me of what happened when we were shooting on that particular day. Every time I watch the scene in Greece with the two men who are shouting across the valley to each other, Lefteris and Panayotis, that always puts a smile on my face because they were so cheeky and they just didn't really want to behave, but really got a kick out of not doing what they were told. And they were warm, lovely people. We finished every day of shooting with a little shot of some clear, strong alcohol, homemade, and biscuits that were fresh out of the oven, and we were treated like family. And there was that is a really warm memory. We also had some really interesting discussions about the crisis in Greece as well, which was really fascinating. And the first time we got to Greece, when we were leaving, one of the families said to us, "We're really happy that you're coming here to film something that is positive about Greece, because we're really tired of the film crews coming here just to film the misery of Greece." And so that was kind of very rewarding, I guess. I saw the whistling language as having the potential to talk about something larger that interests me, and that's the way that cultures adapt and change and survive or die. And I thought that the whistling language was actually a really good metaphor to be able to explore that idea, which I find to be an important idea in my sort of broader interests and in my practice. Early on, I decided that I wanted the work to have a very spatial focus, because the language itself has been developed to communicate across vast tracts of land. So the idea of distance and sound in space, I felt, was a very integral idea in the work. So the installation structure that I settled on with these three images that are stitched together at times to create full panoramic images, and at other times we're seeing different elements within a scene simultaneously. This for me was a way of being able to communicate that idea of distance, of space, and of being in an environment where multiple things are happening, where also maybe communicating the oral environment of that place. So we might see, the wind moving through trees while someone is whistling across a valley, because clearly a whistle travels through wind much more effectively than a shout. So these kind of ideas I was trying to communicate with images to kind of explain and maybe present why this language is why it developed and why it's how it functioned.
And thinking about those people that you filmed, do you have any kind of stories about any particular ones, and what did you love about these people, or where you spent lots of time with them? Is there a kind of a story around that you might be able to tell us?
Yeah, when we did a research trip early last year, because I really wanted to meet with each of the communities and see where they lived, so that I could be informed when I was developing the ideas for the shoot. And when we visited Kuşköy in Turkey, which is probably the most traditional rural village I've ever been to. We had this really fascinating afternoon where we went to meet some people who, in the family, there was a very well-known good whistler in the family, and they were actually just stopping for lunch. And so, like every place we visited in Turkey, we were offered tea and food and fresh bread that had been made out of the oven, and we were treated with such hospitality. And then we were offered if we would like to come inside their home and see, what the house was like. They were really open to us, and so I said, yeah, I'd love to see inside. And so I was shown into a very small home with a traditional stove where the bread was being cooked and the tea was being made. And then I looked over to the part just past the couch, and there was their wireless internet connection and a laptop with Facebook on it from the 19-year-old son who'd just been chopping wood outside, was, on Facebook. So it was really, we had a few moments like that where we felt like we were in another world completely, but at the same time our world, it was, our world followed us there, and there was these two simultaneous kind of realities of, this kind of primitive communication and our 21st century kind of hyper communication present at the same time. So that was really interesting. All of our urban ideas about sustainable living and, urban farms and kind of recycling and sustainability, and the efforts that we go to try and kind of reduce our impact, these people are doing as part of their life. They live in the most reduced, sustainable way I've ever encountered. They use everything. They generate their own energy from whether it's a stone mill or they have electricity in the town, but they are so resourceful and so little waste in everything that they do. Their life is incredibly hard. I don't want to romanticize it, and I don't think that we're adapted to be able to live like that anymore. But it was actually really inspiring to see this community living very simply, and the incredible amount of skills that they have, survival skills, to be able to live in kind of harsh conditions, and also the quality of life that they have. Although they don't have a lot of comforts and luxuries, they have very low levels of stress and cancer. They live very long lives, and that was something that was an amazing kind of experience to have. And in each of these communities, mostly in Greece and Turkey, we saw that because they're living in the mountain, so their whole life is walking up and down hills and collecting wood. They have this incredible robust way of living, and that was really quite inspiring just to see how it's possible to live and how different it is to how we live.